So, good morning or good evening, everyone, and welcome to a new expert talk of the UN Women AI School here in Asia Pacific region. Today, we will talk about how and if can AI can tell good stories. Together with us, we have Dr. Xu and Dr. Liu. Dr. Xu is an assistant professor at the Department of Public Relations of the University of Florida. He's a communication scholar whose research explores how people engage with emerging technologies, including AI, in the context of science, public health, and environmental issues. His recent work examines audience perceptions of AI-generated narratives, persuasive communication strategies, and the social psychology of AI-human interactions. And we also have Dr. Liu, assistant professor at the Department of Population Health Science from the University of Central Florida. Dr. Liu's research focuses on health communication and behavioral science, with an emphasis on digital health interventions and the use of AI to support behavior change. Her work bridges population health and communication, exploring how technology can enhance accessibility and personalization in public health efforts. And as I was saying to both the professors and the guests here today, I can't wait to join. I couldn't wait to join this expert talk because we had a previous lesson on AI-generated content and media, but now it's also a matter of exploring how they impact human beings. And if you all recall, behavioral science is one of the key elements of the UN Quintet of Change. So it's an amazing opportunity that we have here today, and we couldn't be happier to have you here. So over to you, Dr. Xu, Dr. Liu, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Federica. And hello, everyone, and welcome. I will jump straight to the presentation. And if you can see my screen, today we're going to explore a very big question, right? Can artificial intelligence tell good stories? And if so, how can we use that for good? We all know that storytelling is a very powerful tool in advocacy and communication. And with AI like ChatGPT emerging, we want to see how it might help us. And this session, we hope to translate some of our research finding for the general audience, that's all of you, who are amazing advocates from across Asia and the Pacific. And without further ado, let's dive in and discover what AI storytelling can and, more importantly, cannot do, and how it could support causes like health, equality, and social change. But Federica already did a good job illustrating our background. Here are just some additional information about us and our research. But I will move on to the next slide. So first, let's talk about why stories are such a big deal, okay? Storytelling is a universal human practice. Even from ancient times or even prehistoric times, folk tales to personal stories are everything we share every day. They have a powerful impact on what we believe and how we feel. So think about a time you heard a moving story. It might have changed how you see an issue or inspired you to act in different ways. That's why advocates and educators oftentimes use stories in everything from health campaigns to social movements. And stories work so well because they put us into a narrative world. When you are absorbed in a good story, you are not feeling lectured or pressured. You're just in it. In psychology, we call this being immersed or transported. And in that state, people tend to let their guard down and become more open to the story's message, and oftentimes without really realizing it. This is why a story can sometimes persuade or motivate us more than statistics or just logical arguments. It's a tool that many of you probably have already used in your advocacy work. And now why are we talking about story and AI today, right? Well, one big reason is that AI has recently got really good at generating text to the point that it can write its own stories. We all know that in 2023, OpenAI released ChatGPT, which was powered by GPT-3 at that time, but now GPT 4.5, which is trained on billions of words from books, articles, and the internet. You probably have heard about it or even tried it out yourself, right? And I see a lot of our audiences are using AI note takers, right? So like many other AI models, large language models such as ChatGPT can do a lot of things. They can answer questions, They can summarize information. They can even write computer code or and more relevant to our talk, it can write essays or stories on just about any topic you prompt it with. So what's amazing is that you don't have to show it an exemplar story first. AI models now can produce a story out of thin air based on its own training. And we call this zero-shot capability. So essentially, AI being creative on the fly. So suddenly, we have these AI assistants that sound pretty fluent and creative. So the big question is, are the stories they tell any good? And especially compared to human storytellers. And if they are good at telling stories, how can we harness that power for our own communication work? So, so again, the question comes back to why we are using AI for storytelling, right? So this is a big opportunity for scale and customization. And AI like ChatGPT can crank out dozens of stories in seconds, something no human beings can do. And this means we can mass produce narratives tailored to different communities very cheaply. So imagine being able to create a house message story in multiple languages or different versions for different age groups at the click of a button. That's very appealing for global advocacy work. So basically, it opens the door to spreading important messages, such as public health or gender equity messages, far and wide with very minimum cost. So, however, there are also some major challenges. Right? AI doesn't have lived human experience. AI models never feel joy, fear, discrimination, or hope. So what they do is basically remixing what it has read in the training data. So even though they can produce something that looks like a story, it might lack authenticity or originality. It could come out sounding a bit too generic or even get cultural details wrong. So for example, an AI might not automatically understand the nuances of a rural village in the Pacific or the lived experience of women in a particular community. Those are things real people bring to storytelling. So we have a double-edged sword. Huge potential to scale up storytelling using AI, but a risk of losing human touch and relevance if we are not careful. Then let's take a step back to understand what really makes a narrative persuasive. A narrative is basically story in our research context, right? So a big question is what makes a narrative or a story persuasive in the first place? Think of a time you were so into a movie or a novel that you lost track of time. That's narrative immersion, right? When we are deeply engaged in a story, it can change our attitudes almost without us noticing. Unlike a direct argument or a dry lecture, a story sneaks the message in through emotion and character. You are not being told what to do or think about. Instead, you are following a character's journey. And because of that, you don't put your guard up as much. You're not thinking they are trying to convince me for something. You're just feeling along with the story. And also, if the story has relatable characters and scenarios, we might start seeing ourselves in their shoes. And we call this self-referencing. Self-referencing. So, for example, if the protagonist of a story is a young mother and some of you may be young mothers, you might think this could be me, right? And all these factors means you are less likely to counter-argue, which means mentally argue against the message embedded in the story. And in short, stories can persuade by engaging our hearts and imaginations, not just our logical brains. And that's exactly why, for causes like health and equality, a well-told story can sometimes make a bigger impact than a list of facts. So whether it's written by a human or an AI, what makes a story good is something that is of particular interest to our research. And we look at four key ingredients a strong story tend to have. The first is linguistic skill, or in more plain language, good writing, right? A good story should be well written and vivid. That's the baseline. And this means using descriptive language that paints a picture and a style that flows nicely so readers aren't distracted by awkward wording. And the second characteristic of good stories is logical coherence, which means a good story has to have a clear structure, right? It has to have a clear logical progression, a beginning that sets a scene, a coherent middle that develops a plot, and an end that wraps things up. So basically, it should make sense and not leave the reader confused about what happened. The third aspect is creativity. That's not very hard to understand, right? Great stories often include something novel and unexpected, which is something we often call a creative twist or an imaginative scenario or just an unique voice. We don't want every story to be totally predictable or like cookie cutter formula. The third aspect, which is also very important and relevant to our discussion today, is lived experience and emotion. And this one is about authenticity. When we are reading a story, I often wonder, does the story feel real and emotionally resonant? Are the characters' feelings and situations believable? Stories drawn from genuine human experiences, or at least written with empathy, tend to connect more deeply. For example, a story that captures the emotions of a mother caring for her child will ring more true to other parents. And this ingredient is often where human storytellers shine, because they draw from their real lives, right? So when we ask, can AI tell a good story? We are really asking if AI can deliver on those four ingredients as well as a person can. So to get some answers, we designed a research program with multiple experiments. And the first stage of this research project are 3 experiments. And in each one of them, we took a story and created 2 versions of it. One written by a human or a group of humans, and one generated by AI. Then we had real people read those stories and tell us how it feels. We tried this in different story contexts to see if the result hold across the board. One was a literary adventure story, the kind you might read for pleasure, and the second was a health-related story about obesity. The third was a health story about preventing skin cancer. And in each case, we want to see were people equally engaged by the AI story as by the human story. So basically, did the AI keep their attention and imagination just as well as human stories do? And the second question is, did they resist one type of the story more? Like, for example, did AI story make them less likely to mentally, more or less likely to mentally argue back or feel, well, that story is not convincing at all? And persuasive outcomes is something we are also interested in. We wanted to find out if the story actually influenced readers' attitudes and intentions, right? Such as believing a house message or intending to act according to the house message. There's an important twist here. We also tested the effect of labeling. Right? Some readers were told that the stories were written by AI, but others were told that the story was written by human, regardless of which version they actually read. So basically, they were mixed and matched. There's a shuffling there. And we wanted to see if just thinking a story coming from an AI would change how people felt about it. And using this kind of design, we could separate the effect of the story's content from any preconceived bias about AI. And now let's go through each experiment and what we found one by one. Our first experiment used a classic short story called Two Were Left, which is an adventure about a boy and his loyal dog stranded on an iceberg in the Arctic. It's a tale of survival and trust. And some of you might know it. It's been used in psychology research before. We took the original human written story, that's our human version, and then we asked ChatGPT to create an AI version of the same story using a prompt describing the scenario. Basically, the boy and the dog on an iceberg. So we ended up with 2 stories, one by a human author, one by AI, both with the same basic plot idea. We had people read one of these stories, and we also did something sneaky, like we said before, by labeling it. Some readers were told upfront that the story you were about to read was written by a human author, and the others were told that the story was written by an AI. But in reality, some of those who were told that it was written by AI actually read the human story and vice versa. We mixed it up on purpose because we wanted to see if people's belief about the author would change their experience of the story. And after reading, we asked them a bunch of questions. Did they feel transported or absorbed into the story? Did they find themselves counterarguing, like picking it apart or feeling skeptical? Did they like the characters or care about them? And did the story influence any of their beliefs? For example, did it convey any moral or factual points that the readers agreed with? And this would tell us not only just how good the story was, but also how the source might affect the story's power. And the results from the first test were very interesting. Here are what we found. First off, people just got as absorbed in the AI-generated story as they did in the human-written one. So in terms of that immersive feeling of being lost in the narrative, there was no difference between AI and the human-written story. So essentially, an AI can tell a story that keeps reader engaged, just as a human author, at least in our case. But we also find, quite surprisingly, that when reading the story, participants were less likely to counter-argue or criticize the story in their mind compared to those who read the human story. So it seems that AI's version, which was very straightforward and clear, didn't trigger as much skepticism when reading. And perhaps the AI's writing style was so logically organized that people just went along with it more. Okay. And however, this is a big however, the moment people thought that AI wrote the story, it changed their attitudes. Readers who believed their story was AI written, regardless of whether it actually was or not, became more skeptical. They showed more counter-arguing, meaning that they were more likely to think things like, that doesn't sound right, or just pick the story apart. In other words, just label AI made people trust the story less. And this happened even when they were reading the human written story, but believed it was by AI. So it wasn't something inherent in the content causing skepticism, it was a notion of an AI author. And we also saw the labeling effect when it comes to how readers felt about the characters. Readers actually liked the character more when those characters were from an AI-generated story, but when the story was labeled as AI written, people's attitudes towards the character dropped. It's as if knowing an AI created the characters make them feel less relatable and likable. And perhaps readers subconsciously thought an AI doesn't truly understand human feeling, so these characters might not be real. So at the bottom line, AI can produce pretty engaging story, which is a good news for us. But if you tell people that this is AI generated, they might read it with a more critical eye and even enjoy it less. And that's kind of bias or distrust toward an AI author story can undermine the story's impact. For our second experiment, we move into the health communication realm, which is very relevant for those who are working in public health and advocacy. We designed a story about obesity. Specifically, we wanted to see if storytelling could affect how people assign blame for obesity and whether they would support policies to address it. And here's how it works, right? We had two narrative angles like we did before. One story followed the character and implied that personal choice and willpower were the main cause of obesity. And we call this an individual responsibility angle. The other story was similar, but highlighted social and environmental factors like poverty, food desert, genetics, or advertising contributing to obesity, and taking the blame off individual, and we call this societal responsibility angle. For each of these two story angles, we wrote a version ourselves. We adopted a version from an existing research and had ChatGPT write a version. So we would have four story versions, which are human individual blame, human social blame, and etc. We also included a non-narrative text about obesity, more like a short informational article with facts as a control condition to compare storytelling against just giving facts. And people were randomly assigned to read one of this version or the factual article. And as just like in study one, we again manipulated labeling. Some were told that the piece they read were written by AI and others were told it was written by human, regardless of the true source of the message. And after they read it, we asked similar questions as before. Did the story transport them? Did they counter-argue or feel any reactance? Did they find the story relatable or see themselves in it? And we were also very interested in two specific outcomes. Who did they blame for obesity after reading the story, individual or society? And would they support public health policies like community nutrition programs that address obesity? We wanted to see if an AI story could influence these complex attitudes, just like human stories could. The findings of experiment 2 give us somewhat different picture than experiment 1, right? So in terms for what we find is that the human story was more engaging. And in this case, the human written stories outperformed the AI stories in transportation or engagement. Readers who got the story written by a human author reported feeling more transported into the narrative and thought about themselves in the story more than those who read an AI-generated story. So it seems that human writers brought something extra, emotional, perhaps more emotional depth or a writing style that people identified with, which made the narrative more absorbing and relatable in the health context. AI story, while being pretty good, didn't really engage people that much. And but the good news is that in terms of resistance, both versions of the story achieve similar level. So when it comes to counterarguing and reactance, which is like feeling this story is trying to persuade me and I don't like it, right? We didn't see a meaningful difference between AI and human stories. In other words, the AI story didn't particularly reduce resistance, nor did it increase it compared to the human story in this context. Both were on par. So unlike the first experiment where AI content reduced counterarguing, AI did not have that edge in this experiment. But it also wasn't worse, right? And moving on to labeling, right? Labeling had no significant impact, interestingly, right? In this experiment, it didn't really matter if we told people the story was by AI or by a human. Their engagement and attitudes were similar regardless of the label. And that bias we saw earlier with the adventure story didn't show up strongly here. It could be uh, it, it could be because when dealing with a serious topic like obesity or a clearly persuasive message, readers might have focused more on content and less on who wrote it. Or perhaps because both AI and human stories were moderately effective. The label just didn't change things. And the key takeaway is that AI stigma didn't always manifest. It may depend on context or how the story is written. And we also find a subtle effect on blame. We found that the effect was small but notable in terms of how the readers read the story. Those who read the AI written story, regardless of whether it was individual blame or society blame, tended to put slightly more blame on individuals themselves for obesity compared to those who read the human written story. So in other words, the AI story led people to attribute obesity more to personal responsibility than to social factors. Why might that be, right? One potential reason is that AI's writing might have been more simplistic and less nuanced about social issues, and possibly leading readers to default to personal blame. And the human author might have weaved in more empathy or context for societal factors. And it's an interesting difference to keep in mind if we are using AI for social issue narratives, as AI might unconsciously reflect some biases or gaps from its training data. And there's no change in policy support across different research conditions, right? Uh, Story or no story, AI or human, none of the groups stood out in willingness to support policies like a new community health program or a junk food tax. And this suggests that one exposure to a story wasn't enough to really shift policy attitudes, or that our narrative just wasn't focused on policy. And the main effect we saw were more on how people felt about the story and whom they blamed rather than the big behavior intention. So in summary, Experiment 2 showed that human storytelling still had an edge in creating an engaging, relatable narrative in a health context, and that simply knowing something was AI made did not automatically ruin the experience in this case. But it also hinted that AI's way of framing a story could subtly influence interpretation of an issue, like whom to blame for a problem. Now, moving on to our third experiment, which looked at another health scenario, which is skin cancer prevention among young adults. Skin cancer, like melanoma, is a serious issue, and stories have been used in the past to encourage people to protect their skin. We adapted the story from an existing research, which was a story designed to persuade the reader to avoid excessive sun tanning and sunbathing. As before, we prepared one version written by human and one version by GPT. and people either read the AI story or the human story with different labels. We also included more comparison group here. Some participants got a non-narrative message, and some got no message at all. And that way we could see not only AI versus human story, but also story versus no story effect on attitudes. We use similar measurement here with an exception of risk perception, which asks whether the story could change people's perception of the risk about skin cancer and their attitudes towards protection against skin cancer, as well as their behavior intention, which is whether they intend to protect themselves from the sun. And we're basically testing if AI story can influence health perceptions and intentions similarly to a human story. And again, calling it an AI story change everything? Well, the result is very interesting. The skin cancer experiment added more evidence and a few twists to our findings. We find that just like in experiment 1, AI story was as effective as a human story in engaging readers. So both type of story got people similarly immersed. And so again, in terms of basic storytelling that holds attention, AI did pretty well. But well, we also find that the participants who read the AI-generated story were less likely to counter-argue than those who read the human-written story. This mirrors what we saw in the survival story in the first study. And perhaps the pattern isn't that AI's style, being very clear-cut and straightforward, might leave less room for readers to argue with it, whereas a human story might include more points a reader could question or debate internally. It's an interesting strength that AI content might slide under the radar of our skepticism more easily, assuming we don't know it's written by AI. And a quite striking result here is that the label, what people thought the source of the message were, often matter more than who actually wrote it. When we compare the outcomes, a story labeled as human generated generally had a bigger persuasive impact than the same story labeled AI, no matter if the story was truly AI or human written. So in other words, even if an AI wrote a story perfectly well, if people thought that the human wrote it, it had greater effect on them. If they thought AI wrote it, the effect went down. And this tells us audience perceptions and bias about AI can actually overshadow the quality of the message itself. And also human label boosted risk perception and behavior intention, showing that labeling effect not only influence their interaction with the message, but also their behavior and thoughts after reading the message. So to sum up experiment 3, we find that AI can craft effective health story, but audience trust is very important. The content can be spot on, yet if people know or suspect an AI behind it, they might not take it as seriously, which is really important for us to keep in mind if we plan to use AI for health or advocacy storytelling. And beyond numbers and ratings, we also compared actual content and style of the AI-generated stories in our experiments and the human-written ones. And this qualitative look gave us insight into how human and storytelling differ. The AI-written narratives were very fluent and organized. They read almost like a well-edited textbook or a straightforward novel. There were no typos or weird grammar issues, and the plot in the AI story was usually very clear and linear. It stuck to the main events and made sure everything made logical sense. It's like the AI is very intelligent writer that doesn't go off the tangents or leave any loose ends. And that doesn't but we also noticed that AI tended to emphasize external happenings, what can be seen or described. And it didn't really spend much time into the character's inner feelings. And for example, it would describe what the character did, but not often say, I felt terrified and hopeless in the first person way, unless explicitly told to do so. And there was a certain lack of emotional depth or interior monologue in the AI story. The human written stories, on the other hand, showed more flair and diversity, right? Different human writers have very different voices. Some might start with a quirky anecdote, and others with a dramatic description. We saw more variation in tone. A human might inject humor or sarcasm into one line and then a heartfelt confession in the next. And humans were more prone to include more introspective or value-laden reflections, meaning that the character may reflect on why something matters and how they feel about it in a more nuanced way. And human authors also sprinkled in things like metaphors or analogs and subtle emotional cues, which can convey a lot of meaning between the lines. And this touch makes a story feel more layered and alive with personality. And to put it simply, reading an AI story versus a human story, the story is clean and clear. You get a well-structured narrative that's easy to follow, almost like a very competent student essay telling a story. But it might feel a bit impersonal or flat. It tells you what's happening, but not always how it deeply feels. And the human story might have feel more rough edges and might wander a bit, but it often carries an emotional spark or personal imprint that the AI story lacks. And you might sense the human behind the words in subtle ways, through unique phrasing or heartfelt moment, in which can make it more engaging or memorable. Well, we can take a quick pause and boil down the lessons from those first three experiments a little, right? We know that AI can tell decent stories. This is one of the encouraging findings, that AI-generated stories were basically on par with human-written stories. And we also find that AI content often faced less resistance in our experiments where people didn't know who the author was. The story coming from AI tend to generate less counterarguing. But labeling content as AI is a big problem. The moment we told participants the story was written by AI, the story's effectiveness dropped. And this was a consistent pattern. The AI-written label made people trust the story less, engage less, and even enjoy it less. It doesn't matter if the story were actually written by AI or by human. If people thought it was from AI, they were harsher on it, regardless. So in any case, perception of source is very crucial. And people evaluate both the story and storyteller. And our results once again highlighted that, right? So, and some researchers suggest that we may explain this with a concept called source heuristics, which is a mental shortcut, right? Having this source heuristic might trigger doubts. On the flip side, if they think a trusted human wrote it, they might give it more weight. And also, AI stories tend to miss some human touch. And why might an AI label matter so much? Possibly because, as we saw qualitatively, AI stories oftentimes lack cultural and emotional richness. So, in summary, up to this point, we learned that AI can produce good enough stories that in many ways match human stories, but ironically, to really use them effectively, we might have to disguise or downplay the fact that they were from AI. Okay, so after seeing how AI fared with one-size-fits-all stories, we wanted to tackle a tougher challenge, right? Tailoring stories to individuals. I'll be pretty quick here, so we would have some time for a discussion, and Dr. Liu will also have us talk about the implication of this research. But in this follow-up experiment, we studied how better tailoring stories could enhance whether AI could be used to tailor stories. And tailoring basically means customizing a message to fit people's characteristics, like their age, their culture, their personal concerns. And in health communication, a lot of research shows that the tailored message can be very powerful. But creating a truly tailored content for each person could be labor intensive or expensive. You will have to interview people or have them fill out surveys and write different versions for different audiences. But this is where AI could be a game changer, as AI could potentially take people's input and spit out a story crafted for them specifically. And we choose real-world relevant cases, which are cervical cancer screening, which cervical cancer can be prevented or caught early with regular Pap smears or HPV tests, as many of you may know. But many women, especially in certain age groups or communities, don't get screenings for various reasons, and tailored interventions might be a good way to address this. So our big question here was, can ChatGPT effectively generate tailored health narratives? If it can, then health organizations could automate personalized storytelling and potentially boosting things like screening rates. So in our experiment, we tested this possibility. So in this study, we put an AI's tailoring ability to test with something very relevant, which is to encourage people to get screened for cervical cancer. We recruited 272 women aged between 21 and 64, a mix of those who were up to date with screenings and those who were not. And each woman were randomly assigned to receive one of four types of messages, which are non-narrative information, which is a straight fact sheet, and generic narrative, which is a one-size-fits-all story, with a woman who goes to get her cervical cancer screening, and the story tells why it's a good idea to get screened. The target narrative is a story tailored to a broad category, and specifically we tailor it based on age and race and ethnicity. So for example, a young Latina woman might get a story about a young Latina character, whereas an older white woman might get a story about an older white character. And we also have the fully tailored narrative. Here's the most personalized one. We actually surveyed each participant about her specific barriers, worries, and beliefs about cervical cancer screening. Then we had the version of the story that would incorporate those specific concerns and highlight the benefits that would matter to the person. We created the stories using ChatGPT, and we wanted to see that would influence their intention to get a screening or engage, or how much they engage with the message. So here are some results. We did not see a big boost for full tailoring overall, which was somewhat surprising. There was no significant overall advantage in motivating behavior intention. And quite counterintuitively, the generic narrative and the age ethnicity targeted narrative got slightly better engagement and trust rating on average. But there are some very insightful comments in the comment section. Anyway, I'll proceed with the presentation, and we will have time for discussions after this. And it seems that women often prefer simpler message over the one that's full of personal details, right? And we also find that older, high-worry women benefited more from tailoring, even though there was no effect across the board. But women who were older and already very worried about cervical cancer tend to be more responsive to tailored message by artificial intelligence. And on the other hand, for women who weren't as worried or were younger, the generic story might have been good enough or even preferable. And so engagement and trust, in terms of engagement and trust, the generic message was actually pretty good. They tend to be more engaging as compared to the other versions of the narrative. So the takeaway here is that more personalization isn't always better, especially if it doesn't feel authentic. And tailoring could be very tricky, as it has to be done well. And what we learned is that AI can produce tailored stories, but the effect on behavior wasn't dramatically different than simpler approaches. Right. One more study before Dr. Liu talks about the implications of this line of research, right? So we didn't stop at stories. We wanted to see if patterns we observed in the first study also hold in other communication format. So we conducted another experiment focused on factual message, where there's no narrative, just informational content about breast cancer screening. And the idea was to compare human versus AI tailoring in a simpler context. We had 5 groups of participants, each getting a different versions of the message, including a generic message, a targeted message written by a group of public health professionals, and a targeted message written by AI. We also have 2 versions of the tailored message, one fully personalized by public health researchers, which is including both of us and our research team, and the last version was written by AI. And we also, in addition to behavior outcomes, we also assessed people's perceived quality and believability of those messages. So what did we find? Again, there was no significant or huge difference in terms of involvement or quality ratings overall. So statistically, none of the 4 targeted or tailored variants significantly outperformed the generic info in terms of getting people more engaged or thinking the message was of higher quality. And this suggests that simply tailoring factual information didn't massively impress people more, or just giving them generic information. It might be better for the factual content as long as it's relevant and well written. Personalization may not be a huge game changer, but believability is something that stood out. We saw a very interesting finding regarding how credible the messages are as perceived by the participants. And people find that the generic message tend to be more believable. And that was the one not personalized at all. but it was trusted the most. And the least believable was the AI tailored message. So imagine that you put in all this effort to personalize message with AI, and readers actually trusted less than a generic message. Why might that be? Or perhaps the overly tailored AI message comes off as somewhat manipulative or uncanny. People might think this is oddly specific. Who wrote this? Are they trying too hard to speak to me? It could raise some red flags. And this finding again reinforced the idea that authenticity and trust can be very important, but also maybe undermined by AI tailoring if it was not done carefully. So, in short, even outside of storytelling, when AI was used to personalize factual content, it could suffer from credibility issues. And human touch seems to be very important in producing content that people trust, or at least not triggering skepticism the way AI did when it tried to get more personal. All right. So moving on to the next one. Well, these are some takeaways, direct takeaways from the experiment, right? From our foray into the AI tailored messaging, we learned a bunch about strengths and weakness. So in terms of strengths in AI tailoring, there's no denying that it's very convenient. ChatGPT can produce a ton of personalized content very quickly and at scale. So if you need 100 different stories for 100 people, no problem. And AI can do that in minutes. A human team would need weeks to do that, right? And also AI is pretty good at mechanical aspect of tailoring. They can tell stories, use persons' names, mention their age, address their specific worry. And it will do that in a very consistent manner. So in terms of flexibility and volume, AI is a fantastic assistant. It basically democratizes content creation. Even small organizations can generate customized materials without a full creative staff team. But we also see some real limitations here. Many of the AI tailored message feel less genuine to readers. It's like when you get a telemarketing call and they use your name too much, right? Hi Chris. We know you love traveling, so Chris, or that if that this that. But it comes off as very artificial. And similarly, when AI tries to prove that, hey, I know you, that might hit the points but miss the heart. Some participants likely picked up on certain form letter quality, and we also observed adding a bunch of specific personal details could sometimes disrupt the narrative flow, and the story might end up sounding like it's checking boxes, like such as saying because you, a 34-year-old teacher from Asia, have two kids and fear pap smear test might hurt. Let me assure you, if AI writes something like that, you might feel it's not very natural. So trust took a hit with AI tailoring. And people are already a bit suspicious of tailored message. So if on top of that, they think an AI wrote it, they might distrust it even more. So the big lesson here is that tailoring must feel authentic to work, and being personalized is not enough. An audience could be very sensitive. So we have to be very careful when using AI to tailor messages, as tailoring itself, along with the involvement of AI, could lose credibility or have some significant emotional impact. All right, so what we have learned from this entire research journey, right? We can sum it up. The big takeaways from the 5 experiments, right? Very quickly, first, AI can produce quality content at scale, right? Overall, we saw that AI-generated stories were very competent, and they were well structured, understandable, and matched the human version in terms of basic persuasive power. And in some cases, AI even had a slight advantages, like causing less initial resistance, and this means a lot for communication. AI offers a very good way to generate narratives quickly without a huge drop in quality. And people don't just judge the message. This is something we have to note as well. They judge the messenger. And a recurring finding was how much the perceived source, which is AI versus human influenced outcomes, even when the AI content was fine. Labeling it as AI created almost always eroded trust and immersion. It's like serving a delicious meal but telling people a robot cooked it. Some might suddenly doubt it tastes as good. And in our studies, anytime AI was highlighted, our readers became more critical and less persuaded. And this is very important for practice. If you plan to use AI content, you might not want to shout it out, uh, and you need to build trust in AI first, right? People bring their own biases or even fears about AI when they are reading the content. So AI content could be effective, but it's something that we have to be very careful, especially regarding disclosing the actual source. We also find that AI content is effective, but often missing cultural emotional depth. And tailoring is indeed a double-edged sword. Personalizing message is a good practice in house communication, but our work shows that tailoring with AI need to be handled very carefully. When it's done poorly, it doesn't help and can even harm credibility. Our suggestion is that AI plus human could be the best combo. This is the overarching conclusion from the 5 experiments that AI is promising, but it's not yet ready to operate solo in sensitive communications. And it's like a very powerful tool or a junior assistant. You wouldn't let new intern run the whole campaign alone, right? But that intern can be super helpful in drafting materials, brainstorming, translating under supervision. And likewise, AI can augment our capacities, generate first drafts, provide variations, save time, but human oversight, creativity, and ethical sense are crucial to refine those drafts into truly effective stories. Right? Dr. Liu is going to give us some additional insight into this research.
Okay, so Dr. Chu has introduced many interesting research observations. Right now, let's move to the discussion about the implication of our research finding. First, of course, the findings can suggest that we can leverage AI to expand our reach. One clear implication of our research is that AI can help you to do more with less. If you're working on, say, a regional campaign across multiple countries or language, you can use AI to generate customized story content very quickly. For example, you could have AI draft a public health story in several local languages or tweak scenarios for different communities. That could be a game changer for small teams needing to produce a lot of content. It enables a kind of mass personalization that was not feasible before. Even though we can use AI to amplify our campaign reach, but don't make AI the star of the show. When you employ those AI assistant story, avoid framing them as AI generated when presenting to your audience. Like the previous findings suggest, if people know a machine wrote the story, they may be suspicious or less impressed by the overall content. You don't need to hide it ethically, but there's usually no reason to announce it loud. A computer wrote the story for you. Just treat it as a common content. The audience care about the story's message and the relevance, not whether it come from a human hand or just a machine. If anything, if anyone asks, you can say it was a collaborative creation. The idea is to let the story stand on its own so that those bias about AI don't get in the way of your message. It is also important to keep humans in the loop. Think of AI as your assistant. You or your team should always review what it produced to check for factual accuracy. AI can occasionally fabric or get things wrong. Make sure the house information or legal information or any message details is correct. Also check the tones and the cultural appropriateness. Maybe the AI wrote a line that just doesn't fit right culturally, or use an example that off base of your intended audience. Your human insight is irreplaceable here. And also, when creating the content with AI, we also need to aim for authenticity and emotional connections. Use what you know about your community to tweak the AI stories so it can feel very authentic. Maybe it is as simple as adding common names from your community or referencing a local festival, place, or any life details to make people feel real. And also ensure the story has a heart. That's the emotion come through. If the AI's version feel a little bit dry, don't hesitate to insert a helpful quote from maybe a narrative character or a little humorous aside. Those touches make a huge difference. Remember, people respond to story when they feel real. An audience in the Pacific Islands, for example, may respond to a story that mentioned a village meeting and a banyan tree, something very concrete and familiar, far more than a very generic town hall meeting scenario. Those details turn a generic AI draft into a relatable story. Also consider use the hybrid approach to your advantages. The idea may be combining AI efficiency with human creativity. For example, you can have AI generating a base story, then you go through it and adjust the narrative arc or the emotional tones. You outline a story and have AI fill in some descriptive phrasing to save time, then you'll pick the best version. Think of it like a co-writing process with AI. In advocacy work where resources are very tight, this can help produce more material fast while still maintaining the overall quality. It also allows you to experiment. Can AI may give you 10 different version of your story, and you can quickly see which one feel more compelling and emotional engaged to develop further. In sense, the implication of AI is it's not AI will replace you, but AI can empower you if you use it wisely. It is a tool in your toolbox. By understanding its challenges and the strengths, you can leverage to amplify your impact while avoiding unessential pitfalls. Then next slides will give you a few specific do's and don'ts, kinds of checklist for the best practice when using AI for storytelling in your work. So to walk up the practical side, here are some practice and tips when using AI for storytelling based on our experience and research findings. First is to craft your AI prompt wisely. The AI is not as good as instructions you give it. By clear and specific about what you want, mention the target audience and the tone. For example, say you want a story for teenager girls about STEM education, you could prompt saying, write a short, inspiring story about a 15 years old girl in your community or in your country who use coding to solve the problem in her community. Make it very engaging and empowering. This gave AI the direction. If you just say write a story about a girl who can code things, it may just give something very, very generic. The clearer you go, the more on point the draft will be. That can reduce heavy editing later. It is also important to add the human touch yourself. After the AI give you a draft, you can just go through the content and add more local or cultural seasonings. Use names common in the region, refer to a real place or cultural elements such as festival, local food, something relevant to your audience. If the story is about a health issue, maybe mention a local clinic or traditional practice, those details can make people think, okay, this is really authentic, this is true to me, it feels like it is about us. AI may not know those specific unless we told. So that's your job. It is also important for us to double check the content for bias and factual accuracy. When we read the AI output, we need a critical eyes. Sometimes an AI may include stereotype or mention something inaccurate. Ensure the content is aligned with our messaging strategy and factual correctness. Also, scan for any languages that could be insensitive or misinterpreted in our cultural context. The AI doesn't have many left experience or moral judgment. It may not know what a certain phrases is not acceptable or not appropriate in your cultural context. That's where you came in. And it's also important to check your AI generated content. Don't rely AI alone. Don't do just do copy paste. Think AI draft at the first draft you have, even if looks very good, there are likely nuances that a quick human edit can improve. Maybe tweak the opening lines to better grab your audience attention, or the ending to have a clear call to action sentence. That's a polish can ensure the story truly resonates well with your audience. And also remember, AI cannot truly emphasize. It may miss the emotional tones you need. Your polish can add that. And besides that, remember, try our best to keep AI behind the curtain. Don't emphasize that AI wrote the content. Give what we learned from the audience trust issue. It is usually wise not to lead with this story was AI generated. People might then read it actual critical or dismiss it in general. You're not dissing anyone. You are just choosing not to make the tag the focus point. If someone asks, you can say the story was created with assistance of AI tools and human reviews. That's fine because you did review the content and edit it. The key is that when you target audience seeing the story, they see the story, not seeing it as a scientific experiment. If you have the opportunity, you also need to do a quick sense check with a colleague or a member of your community. For example, you could share the story with a community health worker or a volunteer from your advocate group and ask, does it sound natural to you? Does it sound good? Do you feel it could convince someone like you? They may catch something you and AI missed, maybe a word that is not very commonly used in the community, or a sentiment that does not quite hit the mark. This kind of feedback is gold and will help you fine tune the story before it goes out widely. And we also can use AI as an ideal generator. Apart from drafting stories, AI is good for brainstorming, stuck on how to frame an issue. We can just ask AI for 5 different story ideas or metaphors for your case. For example, give me 5 different ways to explain why preventive health checkup are very important in simple terms. It may come up with a sentence like, just like you change the oil in your car before it breaks down, you check your health. You can then develop the best idea further. The AI's training data can spark creative angles you has not thought of before. And it is also important to not over personalized to the point of discomfort. If you are tailoring, be mindful. This is one thing to address a common concern. Like you say, you're worried about the cost. How if you are worried about the cost, here's how you can be free. When you say things in this way, that is good. But when you say, you haven't done your screening yet, you are 45, why not? That may sound spooky if you don't if you not done it very carefully. So we may consider use personal data ethically and carefully, and always in a tone of support and empowering, not try to judge our audience in aggressive way. Ensure that any personalization is something the audience will appreciate, not find aggressive. By following those practices, you can maximize the benefits of AI in storytelling and minimize the risk. The goal is to create content that is effective and trustworthy, and that often meaning blending AI's capability with human empathy and wisdom. Now let's consider what question remains and conclude our talk with some looking forward thoughts. For the study we presented today, there is some limitations. The first one is the related to the research gap and the limitation. Our study were mostly in English setting and recruit participants predominantly in the United States. And we only measure the immediate reactions basically right after reading the message. We don't know if an AI stories influence, if the AI stories influence can stay longer, such as a week later, or even maybe human stories create more lasting changes, long-term impact on behaviors, like did they actually go get a healthy check a month later, something like this. We were not able to detect such kind of perception and behavior change. And also our participants were sitting at computer doing online surveys, such through platform like Prolific and Turk. That's something that's like an artificial setting. In the real world, stories may be delivered very differently, maybe via media, social media, or chatbot, or a community workshop. Those content could alter how people react to the message. Also, online panels have their own biases. If we try AI versus human storytelling in live community events, results may be different. So there is need to test those findings in a more natural environment. Besides those limitations, our research also lead to some open questions. The first one is related to two-way interactions. One big open area here is two-way communication. All our experiment were one way. People read a story or message. But what if in the future, house educator or practitioners is done by an AI chatbot that can tell stories, can also answer questions, clarify doubts, and respond to a chatbot user? Would that increase trust or decrease trust? It could in this way, it may be a solution to mitigate some labeling issue, trusting issue, since we are chatting with an AI. We absolutely know it's an AI, but some chatbot surveys could be more engaging, touching, and proved to be effective. So right now we are curious about how to create a product that contain both a narrative effectiveness and as well as human touch through chatbot function communication. And in related to that, we are also curious in exploring fine-tuning strategies and also the implication of better AI models. In our past study, we used a general model and also use those model to incorporate appropriate prompt to reshape some local tales or high quality house narratives. We expect that with fine-tuning strategy implemented, we were able to create more culturally nuanced and engage the story. However, there's a long way to go to explore the strategies that can facilitate fine-tuning. And also, we also may see differences with different AI models or AI strategies that merged in the recent years. With such changes and technical advantages, we may expect the way of incorporating AI in storytelling or other type of house messages may change a lot in the future. And besides the ones related to technology, we may also be able to see public trust change in over time in the recent year. Right now, AI is new, and there's a mix of fears out there. It is possible that in the near future, people will get used to AI generated content. Maybe they won't care as much, just like people eventually got used to, say, online news or versus printed newspaper. On the flip side, there may be a counter movement where human-made become a mark of quality. We don't know yet. But there's an open question: will the AI stigma fade or intensify? We may keep an eye on this because it's a very important question, a very important issue to consider in research and practice. And of course, from the practical perspective, it will influence the strategy we implemented when we need to disclose AI involvement in the future and how much we need to address the trust gap. Lastly, we should be cautious about the one-size-fits-all approach. Different group may react differently to AI storytelling. For example, younger people who grew up with advanced technology may be more open to AI and AI-related technology, whereas older folks may be more cautious and even skeptical, or maybe not. Also, in some culture, there's high trust in technology and science. In others, personal human connections matters more. Gender-wise, do men and women react differently to narrative or AI sources? There's no actual answer yet, and we are curious about those potential differences and aim to explore more in our future studies. In general, we are through those studies, we've explored the surface of a very new field. We answered some initial questions, but open up many more. It's an exciting time because both AI capacity and public attitude are moving targets. As practitioners, staying informed about new research and new technologies are very important for both educational and practical purpose. To conclude, let's circle back to our core question and what it means moving forward. First, can AI tell good stories? From what we've seen, the answer is yes, it can. AI can generate stories that are coherent, relevant, and even persuasive. It is quite amazing that in a short time, technology has advanced to this point. For communicators and advocates, these present wonderful opportunities. we have a tool that can help us produce content quickly and potentially expand our impact. However, just because AI can tell a story doesn't mean it can do everything a human storyteller can. We should not fall into the trap of thinking AI can solve all our communication challenges, or that we can now automate empathy or cultural vision. Our research consistently show that AI works best with human guidance and support. The human touch remains irreplaceable in a given scenario to give story their real soul. The soul meaning the nuances of trust, reliability, and emotional resonance that come from real people's experience and understanding of their cared community and audience. It is important to remember that a story is not just a sequence of sentence, it's a it's a tube of human connections. It carries a little bit back of our culture, our identity, and our values. When you tell the story in your community, people listen not just to the word, but to the authenticity behind the content. Who is telling, why they are telling, and how it reflects their shared experience. AI does not have a culture or identity. So our human touch is always important and essential to the effectiveness and the delivery of a message. That's the philosophy we recommend is we use AI to augment, but don't let AI replace us. Use AI as a powerful extension of our capability. Let it help us generate draft, explore creative angles, or produce content faster than before, but keep the human storyteller in the driver's seats. It is similar to having a smart assistant. It can support you, but it should not replace the expert. You know your audience heart. Looking ahead, we are very optimistic. If we combine AI strengths with human insight, we can reach more people with tailored and engaged story than ever. And imagine being able to produce provide interactive story-based education and customize advocate message in dozens of languages very quickly. AI can help scale up our effort to address many health issues and also address gender or health equity issues and promote general well-being across different segments of the population. And overall, to conclude, AI is a new companion or storytelling toolkit. It writes very fast, but we still need to get what the story gets told and how. By doing this, we ensure that these AI tales truly serve our goal, whether it's empowering women, improve public health, or driving positive social change. Well, maintaining the trust and authenticity that make a story very powerful in the first place. Thank you all for listening and joining the exploration. I hope this presentation give you some useful insights and idea on using AI in your own work. Let's keep the dialogue going. We are happy to take questions or hear about your experience with AI or storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Liu and Professor Xu. It was an amazing presentation. I think there's so much material to reflect about, and also so many questions that remain open about how to leverage AI for behavioral change while managing competing aspects that we need to take into consideration. But I also can confidently say that your research was a step forward in that direction. And we are so proud and happy to have you here today with us. So I see there are a few questions in the Q&A panel. Maybe if also Emad is okay, we could take one of those as we are running a bit out of time and we have another session scheduled in 15 minutes. So we're gonna take one and then push the rest, like reshare the rest with you and maybe have, a written answer that we can share with participants. I think also some of the questions were answered throughout the presentation. And yes, for those who were asking, the research is available on online article. We will share the article with you, and that would be a nice way to get more into the data. So, someone was asking, we will take one of these questions. So, someone is saying, I find it's increasingly becoming easy to identify AI content. Wouldn't not labeling or mentioning use of AI decrease credibility in the long run? And what are your thoughts on the ethics of the same, which has been upvoted by two participants as well? So, what do you think?
Give me one second. Sorry. I thought the sharing has stopped, but well, yeah, sorry for going over time. We, like I said in the chat, we prepared a lot because it's such an exciting opportunity, right? So regarding disclosing the identity or the source of the message, like we said during the presentation, is first is that when you're creating a story, our recommendation is to at least have strong human supervision of the final product that's being released to your target audience. And in that case, the product that you eventually distribute to your audience will be a co-collaboration between you, be a co-product between you and the artificial intelligence agent. So in that case, it would be a good idea to be ethical and transparent by telling people that AI may be involved, but I don't think, as our research results showed, it's a good idea to attribute the work to artificial intelligence. Actually, we did some other research that's relevant here. We actually asked people to evaluate whether something was written by AI and asked them to evaluate the source's credibility, competence, warmth, even morality. We find that when people believe that something was written by AI or someone used AI to replace their own work, people distrust the person more and they believe that the person is less moral. So basically, using AI is not really something that's worth bragging about nowadays, which is quite unfortunate. So highlighting the importance of human contribution and the idea that you are behind your work is very important. So there's a fine line to walk here, right? We have to be transparent and ethical and honest, but at the same time, when framing the source of your work, it's quite imperative to emphasize a human involvement and human input in it. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much. Professor Liu, do you have something to add to this question, or I think?
Yeah, in general, I think Dr. Chu highlight the most important part, the way you choose to frame the creation process is most important. We should be ethically present everything clear, but the part you need to highlight serve as the core of the message sometimes can largely impact our audience attention and trust and engagement of the message. So there's many ways to say one sentence. Maybe at the current stage, I would say try to say it wisely and frame it strategically.
Thank you so much. I think this also somehow establishes a connection with our next expert talk because we're talking here about the importance of also recognizing the human factor in AI-generated content and in using AI and let's say how to talk to the AI or programming. And this is also reminding us how technology is never neutral and the human factor still plays a fundamental role. So artificial intelligence can't exist with human intelligence. And now we're going to have an expert talk about data, something that is always considered neutral as well, but is actually not. And we will see how and why. So thank you again, Professor Xu and Professor Liu. We will also share your presentation with participants and any additional information you have, including the article that Professor Xu was mentioning. Please feel free to share. If you want to stick around for this second talk, please feel free to do that as well. In the meantime, I would say for participants to just get a short 15-minute break, like 14 minutes break, to be honest, and let's start again at 11:05. So this will give us time to prepare all the technical elements. Thank you all so much, and I will stop the pause the presentation right now.